she's like this pro basketball player. It's because I don't know sports, but it was like this pro basketball player and then a pro.
Alycia Debnam-Carey, welcome to What the Elle.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so
Maybe
excited to
like first
have you.
podcast, I think.
Oh, really? Well, we're very honored. I am very excited to talk to you. You've just come back from New York where you were there for the Dior pre-fall show. Can you tell us all about that? I mean, it looked amazing.
It was so great. It was so wonderful. I think also for Maria Grazia Chiuri to have it in New York is also a really big deal. So many of the collections are only shown in Europe. And I think the last time they hadn't had one in the States in a really, really long time. I'm pretty sure. And then to also have it in the Brooklyn Museum was really, really cool. So to see some of the artworks there, I didn't realize, but Alicia Keys and Swiss Beats had first of all, I didn't realize they were married. And then second, I was like, they have a whole collection of the most extraordinary artworks that are then just on display. And it was so great to go in, see all that at first, be surrounded by the art, and then go into the show, which was, they're always so beautifully constructed. The spaces are incredible. And then all the people there are super cool too. I didn't realize, but I was like sitting next to this is terrible now, I've forgotten. She's like this pro basketball player. It's because I don't know sports, but it was like this pro basketball player and then a pro surfer, both Olympians. And I was like, this is so amazing. Like they were like, do you do sport? And I was like, no, I don't do sport. I was like, I do Pilates, but like not in the
I'm
same
an
way you
artist.
do.
Yeah,
I'm an artist.
I'm an artist, but I admire. I mean, that's the amazing thing about fashion shows is like the different people who are gathered into one space who would in no other context all be together.
Exactly, in so many different facets of life who are all very extraordinary at what they do too. It's kind of the creme de la creme coming together, especially for shows like that. And it was great. I mean, it was also a really lovely collection. I felt like so many of the pieces I was like felt very wearable and of course very aligned with the Dior aesthetic and look, that classic sort of feminine shape, but also very strong and very powerful. But then a lot of that androgynous thing too, for like a little bit more of a men's tailoring for women. It was really great. I just loved, also absolutely adored the Galliano newspaper motif come back with the saddlebag, which I was immediately like, I want it.
You, for anyone who doesn't know, were appointed the first ever Australian ambassador for the House of Dior, which is like a huge, huge, crazy deal. Would you mind just talking a little bit about that experience of getting to that level, working with a brand that is obviously just so remarkable and revered? Like, what has that process been like since you started that ambassadorship last year?
It's been a really special journey. And I think, as you said, without trying to be like, um, it's a very rare opportunity. This is the first Australian ambassador for Dior. And so I think it's not lost on me how um, special that is, I suppose. I've always been someone who's loved fashion since I was very young. I was one of those kids that was always just like, you know, poring over magazines, fashion magazines, cutting everything up, making my own scrapbooks. Like that was always like, I just loved and drawing my own designs as a kid too. So it was just something that I always loved and was always wanting to be a part of. Um, and I think also going having a career that wasn't necessarily defined by fashion in any way. A lot of the shows I was doing was quite like anti-fashion, was like apocalyptic, like covered in dirt or blood. It wasn't so much of like a fashion show. So I always hoped that I would find myself in a position to explore that a little bit more. I do think, obviously different projects allow for you to explore different costumes and character attributes through fashion. But I was always like, I really want to explore this for myself too. So I think it was one of those very unique symbiotic moments where I was sort of on the hunt, and I think Dior were too. We serendipitously were aligned in being able to go to or be at the same event together. And I think then they were just sort of watching on the sidelines for a couple of years before they were like, you know what, we've been watching you in silence and we like you enough and we would love for you to be an ambassador. And it was such a it's such an honor for me to be a part of this legacy brand and such they are one of the most revered houses for fashion in the world. So everything they do is with the utmost care and respect and quality. It's been very amazing to be a part of, and then to understand the history of it all, and then to throughout going to 30 Montaigne in Paris and learning the history and about Christian Dior himself, and then all the designers that have come after him. It's just been such an honor, such a privilege, and to be there first also then I feel like has allowed for us to explore what we can we explore a new space in Australia too. I feel like so often we look outward for that kind of stuff. We look outward for fashion in the world. And I've often thought too, the way that just even our seasons are opposite, and how so often this like cyclical nature of fashion is sort of opposite to for our consumer palette in Australia. So I don't know, to have more of that coming locally, for it to come from home soil is also really amazing to be a part of. So I kind of am excited to see where we can expand from that.
I love that. We met for the first time in Paris very shortly after you'd been announced. And I just remember you came in and you were wearing like vintage Dior from the 90s. Like you're obviously very into fashion. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit from your own perspective now, as we'll get into many of your like most famous roles were roles where you were wearing like a wife beater and jeans and covered in mud 15 hours a day. What has it been like for you to have this stretch of time where you've been able to like tap into and explore fashion creatively, like outside of your work?
It's definitely made me more excited to play. It's made me more excited to discover and enjoy fashion. I think there's also such an awkward time in your life when I don't know about you, but for me at least, when I was in my 20s, where you're just trying to figure out what you're wearing and like what your personality is and what you want to look like. And I think we were also at an age where there were some of the most heinous fashion choices
The
going on.
worst, like undiscussable.
Heinous, like
Heinous.
crimes, things like what was happening with like those huge statement necklaces. Like, what were we doing? And like,
Oh my
why was
God.
cobalt blue and everything? It was just not okay.
Color
So
blocking.
color blocking is a crime. And so I think for me, it was really just trying to it was such a time of Tumblr and Pinterest. And like, you were really like, I want to look like, it was just not Alexa Chung, but like you could never look like Alexa Chung and throw it on. Like, I want to look like Mary-Kate and Ashley, and like it's boho chic, but you end up just looking like you're wearing a tent. I think for me, it was like now I'm at I've had made all the mistakes, come around to then being able to play. And working with Dior has been such an amazing platform to do that. I think it's inspired me to go back through the archives and rifle through a lot of, designers and their collections. And so I think what I was wearing when we first met was like a John Galliano for Dior, little cashmere kind of printed summer top. It was so cute. But it's because then I suddenly was inspired to play more and like, what are my fashion icons and who do I want to pull from? And so being with, I think, Dior as well has been able to narrow my field of vision to focus and play in that world, which has been really nice. And then it's kind of opened me up for a lot more discovery too.
I want to jump back to childhood and yeah.
Let's get into the psychoanalyzing.
Let's go back to
Let's start.
childhood. But I just want to talk. You had quite a remarkable career from an early age. You were working from the age of 8 or 9. You worked on Martha's New Coat, which is this fantastic short film. I would love for you to just talk about, I guess, how sure you were of what you wanted to do from such a young age, and what it was like to actually start working professionally on sets when you were that young.
Mm. I think it was so integrated into my life at such an early age because my mom was a children's television writer, and so she was often needing kids to be a part of little skits. And it would be like, how do you build a rocket ship out of an egg carton? Go, and so it was always fueled. It was always like a part of my life, and I just loved that environment of collaboration and creativity. I think that's probably what it was. And then having that unvetted, just creative expression at such a young age as well. And so I wasn't quite aware of that until probably Martha's, and I wasn't aware of how much I loved that environment until Martha's New Coat, and that was then that aha moment. And I was still very, very young, but it was seeing a band of creatives all together, living in this sort of singular location and always working together and discussing and asking questions, and how many overlapping creative prospects were coming together to make one thing. And I just remember it being this, it's like the lights switched on and I was suddenly, that's all I wanted to do and all I wanted to be a part of. And that environment, that energy of a set is kind of, there's nothing quite like it. And seeing how many creative facets were coming together, the one being honestly like the costume department, going into the costume truck, and there's just, it's lined with racks of different clothes and for different moments that gave you a certain feel. And they were then designed to make you feel emotion, and knowing that when you're rifling through the racks, like that's what they're trying to express to an audience, like that was really compelling. And then having this amazing director, Rachel Ward, who's just, so fantastic, and the way she would also connect and collaborate, that it was just such an inspiring time. And it was a very, like, I have such sensory overload of that time too, like everything about it felt very clear in my mind. And so I remember once that happened, I kind of just changed a lot, and it meant that I kind of didn't have any other career objective beyond, like, once I got back to school, I was like, you're all idiots, like you're children. You know nothing of the real world. I'm a creative. So it's just like absolutely the most obnoxious. I think I even came back, I'd like written a diary too, and like came back to read it to the class and of like my travels. And I do remember feeling though there was like a split that had happened where it suddenly felt like I'd seen a different part of the world and myself and prospects, and suddenly coming back to school was very jarring, I suppose. And so and then I think that's kind of, yeah, that was it. That's all I wanted to do. And so it fueled then a love for it, but also then a steady build for growing.
You went to LA, to Hollywood, when you were 18, and often there are these stories of people like toiling away for years and years and waitressing, but you kind of started getting work very, very quickly from when you arrived, to the point where you actually had to think about strategically about what do I say no to and what do I say yes to, and how does this work? Can you talk a little bit about that first sort of 6 months when you got to LA, and I guess what a baptism by fire it was to understand how to navigate that industry?
When I had a very unique experience when I first got out here. I did have representation, which had like helped significantly. I think that's a very big reason why I had early success in comparison to, I think, a lot of people now. It was also a different time. Social media was nowhere near as accessible, available. You were really like, Facebook was kind of the only medium that you could be like, hey, does anyone have like, you know, like a room available somewhere to stay for 3 weeks or something? But other than that, it was, you really needed connections. Otherwise, you were just on your own. So I was lucky in that respect for sure. Um, I, and I'd had that because I'd built a steady sort of, not even career, but steady amount of work up until I was 18. So I'd signed with my managers when I was in Australia. So I had a runway already, but it was a combination, honestly, of naivety, youth, pure adrenaline, and tunnel vision, and just sheer drive and ambition that were a fierce combination to come into LA. But it was a very lucky run. I mean, I think for the first year I was very lucky. I got um an offer to test for a huge pilot, which was the Carey Diaries. At the time, it was like a big deal, and then to also be the lead of this indie film. And I remember that choice being a very an offer to test for a huge pilot, which was the Carey Diaries. At the time, it was like a big deal, and then to also be the lead of this indie film. And I remember that choice being a very, like, it's just such a high stakes choice, but I guess it was because there was no guarantee to be able to stay out here. You had 6 weeks to be able to make it, or you were going back home. Like, that's all the money that I had, and that was it. Like, it was, and so I guess there was no other option in my head. It was one of those few times, and also where it did work out, and I said no to the right thing, I suppose. And well, actually, no, I didn't. I said no to the thing that I said no to the film, did the Carey Diaries. The Carey Diaries didn't want me anymore, and then the film came back. So it was again, there's like a lot of luck in this game, but I suppose it was an early lesson into being strategic and playing your cards right. And I guess I've always tried to be very savvy about how to do that. There is so much luck in this game, but there was also a huge amount of strategy and knowing what your best bet is. But I had a really lucky first round, and I got another 3 months off in LA, and then managed to get another film. At first, that was a really like solid run, but the second year I didn't work at all. Like, I ran out of money completely, and then had to take the first job that came my way. But I think from then, I've always led with instinct, I suppose, and then gone, what is going to be the most creatively fulfilling? And then after that, trying to like figure out what's going to position me to be able to have the career that I want, that's going to feel fulfilling. But it's easy to have that perspective 10 years on. I think at the time it was also, you're choosing between yes and no, as you said. You're not necessarily choosing you're choosing out of what's the better option.
And also, it's like, what I didn't really understand till talking to you about this was that it's not just you get like, do you want to do the Carey Diaries or the independent movie? Do I want to be more of this or that? It's like the Carey Diaries, or whatever the big TV thing is, it's preemptively, before you've even got signing up for many, many years of your life, like 7 or 8. And there's a chance that it gets stuck in production, and that you're waiting and not working for 3 or 4 years, and then actually never gets made, or it gets made and it doesn't get shown. So it's not just like the strategic side you're talking about. It's not just as simple as making choices of which projects are more artistically interesting, as much as it is like navigating a system that is a business with lots of competing factors, and lots of factors that you have no control over. Like, it's very, very complicated.
Absolutely. And you're so right. Like, it's not you're having to weigh up, like, okay, well, this will go, I'm signing a contract for 7 years. That's going to take me out of work. Or this is, you know, if I take this job, I might miss out on the other one. And even if I'm going to bet on this hand, the other might, like, it might still fall through, and then I won't get that other one anyway. So there are so many factors. And I also think, what I honestly think is that the idea of choice in this industry is the luxury of very few. It's not
Mm-hmm.
common. I think the idea of choice really doesn't even, like, often apply to me. It applies to me now in my, like, at 30. I think I get projects that come my way, and I have the ability, the stability, the security to say, no, I don't want to do it. But previous to that, a lot of the time you had to say yes. And so when people are talking about, oh, like, why did they do that job? Or like, that didn't, like, I didn't like it, or blah, 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 whatever. Oftentimes, like, you're doing it because you're playing a longer game. Like, your choices are further up the road where you finally have the stability and the security. That didn't, like, I didn't like it, or blah, 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 whatever. Oftentimes, like, you're doing it because you're playing a longer game. Like, your choices are further up the road where you finally have the stability and the security to say no to things. But that's a luxury that is reserved for very, very few. And I would say even I'm only there kind of now. And even still, I'm on a specific tier where that exists. There's a whole other tier of successful actors that are living in places where they can say yes or no to huge studio movies, or yes or no to huge directors. So there's so many levels of strategy and politics in this industry that I think a lot of the public are just aware of the overnight success story of, oh, it really worked out, and you've, like, now you're on this path to success. But there's a lot of biding your time and earning your stripes and being in the trenches. And yeah.
You worked on two really, really successful shows sort of back to back. The first was The 100 and then Fear of the Walking Dead. And they had sort of stratospheric success in terms of how, like, critical plus how viewed they were. And in both of those shows, you played characters that became almost like the cult icon, like the cult character of two series. Maybe starting with The 100, which is sci-fi, amazing costumes. Could you talk a little bit about that experience being on that show and what it felt like to be playing a character that you suddenly felt this influx of energy of, like, people really, really resonating with?
It's interesting because I had originally gone up for that show as, like, a long-term series. I, like, auditioned as, like, part of the, like, main cast, and was like, but pulled out because I was like, I don't think I can do, like, a 7-year contract. Like, I just don't know that that's, like, something that I'm willing to do. Because it takes up significant portions of your year to be on that. And I was like, I think I want to be able to move around and explore and do different things, have the freedom to do other things. But I remember, like, it was so I'd said no. And then there was this sort of huge lull that second year where I just, like, didn't work on anything. And I remember
Like, why did I do that?
I know, I was like, what did I do? And I remember getting this call from Jason being like, hey, the showrunner being like, I've got this really amazing character and I really would love for you to play her. And it was sort of one of those, I don't know what it is, if it's sort of like there was the universe was like, you are supposed to be a part of this. So I ended up being like, I'd love to read it, loved everything about it, and then went to start shooting. And it was one of those really beautiful experiences where we all got to, again, collaborate. I think being a huge key piece for me, collaborate on this character, with then all the costumes, the makeup, the hair. And it was one of those characters that we really got to play. Like we did all different kinds of tests for the makeup until we settled on that really iconic look. And same with the hair and then the costumes. And we got to, you know, create these costumes that had underlying meaning for the character and for their like history. And so it was that was really, really fun. And then I think to see how well it was received was, I mean, it was definitely unexpected for me. It was one of those kind of true moments where you're like, I didn't expect that to do so well. But I think it was the fact that we were building a character from the ground up and paying so much attention to detail that really resonated with a lot of people. And it was then also that I think obviously what resonated with so many people too was the fact that we weren't beating them over the head with like, you know, this is a gay character. It was a character that had complexity and depth and was just a person that also we then were able to explore their sexuality in a very organic and caring way that came out of context and not just like, here they are, they're gay, you know, like it was it was a really, so it sort of blossomed into something really special that I was not expecting. And it was a very new experience as a person to see that kind of intensity grow from it, and that also level of interest and you know, passion, I suppose. It was very new to me. And so then I guess doing Fear the Walking Dead was another version of that. I think I was a little bit more prepared because it was already comic book. So, and like The Walking Dead was already such a success, so I knew what that would entail. But it's an intense experience to be on two very you know, cult shows that people really love and that are very meaningful to people too, which is like on one hand a really special experience because people you know, care about it so much, and they're the reason why you're able to continue a successful career, I guess. But also there's a level of intensity that comes with it too that's very different from, I think, being just on a regular show.
We are so thrilled to be exclusively partnering with Kerastars on the launch of What the Elle, hosted by Elle Australia. This podcast is all about celebrating hair loss is one of the leading beauty concerns for women. Hormones, diet, overbrushing, which on the advice of our amazing, and honestly the results have already been. And to Kerastars for sponsoring this first season of What the Elle, hosted by Elle Australia. And the medium of TV, there is something that's specifically intimate about it in a way that, like, you know, we love films, but you watch TV, especially shows that are comfort shows that people watch over and over again. You start to feel like these characters in this show are part of your life or part of your friendship group or your family. So you're having millions of people watch that and have that experience of like a sense of intimacy with you. And then you're sort of going to a Comic-Con or something where it's a lot of people who are all having this very special moment seeing you at once. But I can imagine that that's quite a lot of energy to take in one go.
It's a lot of energy for sure. And it's also, you know, you experience that intimacy as well because those characters, your favorite TV shows, are in the most intimate places of your life. They're in the evening before you're about to go to bed. They could be like you're watching them in bed. You could be like relaxing on the sofa in your living room at home by yourself. Like there's this intimacy that's even just like created by the geography of your life too, not just also the repetition of seeing them all the time. So you do connect with these characters and these shows on a very deep level. And so it can be then very different to because obviously I'm not watching my
You're not
shows.
binging your own show.
I like did them, that's enough. um and so it's sort of, you'll have this disconnect sometimes where you'll have done them, then it's like a time later and you're at Comic-Con or something and you actually experience the energy in real time. And it's it's kind of amazing. It's one of the only places that you actually get to connect with people in that capacity one-on-one. So often it's now online, it's through social media, you don't get to really connect, but in those situations you're seeing real world connection, which is special. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what creating a show like Fear of the Walking Dead actually entails? Like how much of the year you're filming it, where you are, what the conditions are like to create that like apocalyptic dystopian effect. You're shooting, you're being pursued by zombies. Like what does that process look like to a person who has no idea?
It's a well-oiled machine. That's the first thing I'll say. It's almost militant in how well oiled it is. Sets are such a unique environment. They're almost akin to like a kitchen, like a chef's kitchen, or like a military sort of like training camp, because everything is to the second. There's a ticking clock on everything because you need to film a lot of material in a really short time. But for us, we do like 15 episodes of TV. That would be about 7 months of the year. Each episode takes about between 8 to 10 days to film. There is a huge amount of prep time that goes into then being able to create an hour of television. And 8 to 10 days, by the way, is very fast for a show like that. There's especially, I think, because for us, there's building sets, there's a lot of location pieces. So for 2 weeks, we'll have our like art department, location department, production department starting to build like a huge set piece that will create the basis for the next episode. And for like the episode I directed, for example, we had everything was kind of like a boat graveyard, and it was all elevated on 12 feet above ground, and it was all shipping containers connected with gangplanks. And so we needed to actually create this set, and there was just a field when we started. It was just a field in the middle of nowhere with like 2 boats that they shipped in and like placed in the ground. From that, it took them 2 weeks to build everything up 12 feet, to like connect them with all these and it all has to be so like a film crew can stand on them too. So you've actually got film equipment, lighting equipment. It has to be built so it can withstand so many people. And it ended up being, I don't know, 2 football fields worth of containers and boats and gangplanks. And then, for any given show like that kind of show, The 100 was quite similar too. You're bringing in 100 extras every day. There's always a huge set piece. There's like a stunt choreography that has to go into before you start filming. There's like 3 horses. Maybe you'll be doing 2 cameras. Maybe there are 3 most days. So like it's a huge production. It's not like a small set, which is also what's so exciting about it, because every day really felt like, in quotation, Hollywood. Like it really was like big and spectacular, which is super fun. But it's a lot of work. Every single set piece is also dressed down to look like it's apocalyptic, and that takes a full team, a couple of days to do, so that everything looks like it's like been decades of decay on everything. And then there's the special effects team that go in and do all the zombie makeup. But it's for such a huge production, though, it moves very, very quickly. But all in all, it takes about 7 months to film 15 episodes. So it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and that's a huge commitment to be. It's obviously an incredible show, incredible job. But like for many years, to have 7 months of a year where you're away from an infrastructure of your life, like you're away from your family, but you're also not in a base in LA. Like, was that something that after many years of doing it, you sort of hit a point where you're like, okay, I kind of want a different rhythm to my life now?
Absolutely. And also, I think for me, it was like there was a psychological effect that really happened where you're existing in an apocalypse for 7 months of the year. And that's a really intense experience to be going through, especially at a young age where I didn't really have a lot of other responsibilities or life context yet. In that I mean, like, my family lived in a different country. I didn't necessarily have a base. I was living out of suitcases. I didn't have a home to come back to. I didn't have a partner. I was sort of floating, and my home became this version of an apocalypse that I was then living day in and day out. And you get a couple of months off, but you're just then trying to recalibrate. And I think after a while, that got really hard to deal with for me. It was something that I really needed, like a fresh change of scenery. I need to feel like I was doing and experiencing something else. Because a lot of the other actors on the show too were older, and they had already had, I think, like tethered connections to their real world, whereas mine was sort of just operating in this like apocalyptic fantasy type thing, and I just had no real like grounding after a while. And again, you're like seeing decay and destruction in your everyday life, and like your brain understands, but your body doesn't know. And so there were times where I would just be like, working 14 hours and then have dirt under my fingernails and kind of like, and dirt covered me, like take a shower, but it's not coming off, and be like, well, I got to get up again in like 6 hours. So I may as well just keep it on. And so your life sort of starts to mimic the environment that you're in. And I think for me, after a while, I just was like, I need to shift. Because I wanted to grow and change, and also find a grounding for myself that I don't think I had the chance to really discover. Yeah.
Did that collide with COVID timing wise, and did that have an impact? Like, did that allow you to have a bit of a breather? Like, did you go back to Australia? What did that kind of help in a way?
I'd say like a year before was really when I was like, I feel like I need to shift. Um, and then the pandemic really emphasized that, I think, then solidified that for me. It gave me the chance. And I think like a lot of people, suddenly you were just forced to reckon with your internal self. Like, what do you really want and who are you? And also not the best place to be doing it. I mean, we were all just like on a life raft and we were like, who am I? But like, we were all in it together, I suppose. And so, yeah, I was actually, it was one of those, it was kind of it was difficult time for me because I wasn't able to go back to Australia during the pandemic because we didn't know really what was going on. We stopped filming in the middle, and we had then no one knew when it was going to end, and I couldn't really go back because it wasn't able to get back in, kind of thing. And so I was just sitting here in LA for 7 months by myself in my house, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I need to, it was really hard. And I it forced me to really be like, how do I want to feel? Like, what is my experience of my day-to-day life like? And is that making me happy? And there were a lot of things that I wanted to change.
And you had, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly from our conversation, a surge of creativity. Was it in that period or was it after that period where you began writing? You mentioned you directed an episode of Fear of the Walking Dead. Was there a kind of light at the end of the tunnel of that experience where you suddenly were like, these are all these creative things that I want to do?
Yeah, I think it definitely was seeded in that during the pandemic, during that 7 months off. Like everyone, I think we're all like, let's go back to like hobbies. And for me, weirdly, to go back to our childhoods, it was me going back to my childhood and what inspired me and what drew me creatively. So I started painting more, I started drawing, I started trying to write. I wrote like a short, and I think it was also born out of that idea of when I was on Fear and I was in this apocalyptic environment all the time. I was like, I want to write something that is the opposite. It acted as if as an escape. So I wrote this short film that was like a, more of like a rom-com, that I was like, this is fueling my creative experience in a different way. And so from that, it really just did. It opened up this space to explore and go back to then what gave me that like kind of that childlike creative expression, I suppose. There's so much of, once you get into the professional field of like creativity and being either, if it's like an actor or director or in fashion or in, publishing, there's then now these rigid deadlines and rigid boxes that you have to fit into, that's then compounded by marketing or PR or what an audience, how many eyeballs you're getting, and it quashes this just like freedom, and it creates a barrier of fear around a lot of it instead. And so I was really interested in how would it feel if I just like wrote and played and drew like an idiot, like, you know what I mean? Where you're like, I don't know, I'm sure, but maybe I can only imagine you would have been the same way. But like when you're a kid and you're just like creating and you're just making things and it's just fun and it's playful and it doesn't have to be the best thing in the world. And I think I've got such a perfectionist trait. I've got a really ambitious trait. And the two of them then were forcing each other in this little box that was just like, you have to be right. And right is not creative. Like,
100, like, it's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about a girlfriend of mine is an artist, a painter, and she wanted to get a group of us together to test doing a live class that she was doing. And I was anxious about it for literally like 4 days. It was like a fun, completely informal group of friends drawing. And I was like, I'm not good at drawing. I'm going to embarrass myself. And the first thing she got us to do was to draw, she had like a tomato on the table, and we drew it with our left, whatever was not our writing hand. And the whole idea was to just get out the way, doing it really, really badly, realizing nothing bad was going to happen, and just bringing it back to that exact thing you said, that childlike sense of play and fun. And we do. It's such a sad thing that we are attracted to things as children because they look fun, and then we pursue them and like get into this space that we desperately wanted to be in when we were kids, and then lose the fun of it. I think it's something you have to really work to retain.
And to reopen, because there is so much pressure that then put on you and put on people to succeed and be right. And I think when I was in that period of COVID, I was also understanding that I'd created this pressure to be successful and not be successful because I was being creative. Mm-hmm. It was, and look, you have to do both. It's not, unfortunately, I would love to be like, and the bills will just be paid because I'm having a good time. Then they're not always. But I think at least it allowed me to start playing again. And to be wrong, it's also like, and which is also the idea of wrong in creative space, as everyone knows, is also stupid. Like, it's bullshit, it's supposed to be to just build and explore.
And that thing you just said of like, we're in a culture, like, making money and paying the bills always matters, but it feels like we are in a culture right now that is so focused on like productivity and optimization that we've been trained that if we're doing something that doesn't have a clear path to monetization, it's a waste of our time and we shouldn't be doing it. And every minute should be like optimized. And I think that's something that I really worked through in that period too, was realizing sometimes I would sit down to watch a movie and feel guilty. And I was like, I'm feeling guilty because I'm just doing something that's creative and pleasurable and doesn't have some sort of end game. It was just like that's so internalized that you really have to work to undo that. Like, I'm doing this for no other reason except it's expressive and fun.
Yeah. Or even like I went through such a huge phase where I was like, I'm only reading non-fiction books because it'll nourish my brain. And I was like,
Yeah.
what am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, just go read the fairy smut. It doesn't
Yes.
matter. Like, it's okay. Have fun.
Literally, life's meant to be enjoyable. I know, it's so true. I'm so guilty of that as well. It's but I guess it's like you say, it's just an ongoing thing. You never find the resolution or the answer. It's just like a tension that exists
Yeah.
forever.
Forever. It will
Forever.
never end. Yeah. But, I think it does also probably, if you can like harness it when it comes in waves. And I also think being able to, what's really interesting? I was reading this, who's the guy? Ian Fleming. He wrote James Bond, right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
So he had this, one of the most prolific writers, right?
Yeah.
However, his day-to-day consisted of like, I woke up, I had a lovely breakfast, I went to the lake, swam around for a bit, came back, had some wine, relaxed a
Love
little bit,
him.
wrote like for an
Ian.
hour, came back, went for a huge walk, loved it, had a really nice dinner, wrote for another 2 hours, bed. Like there was no like, I mean, that's also completely
Love
like
that for Ian.
any of the like the shackles of society today, clearly. But like like
Yeah, no,
there,
like post on Instagram and
yeah,
respond to 100 emails and
yes,
yeah.
exactly. But there's something to it, right? That there is joy in the experience, and time and space has become, I think, the coveted luxury of today, unfortunately.
It's so true. I feel like The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart was probably what so many people in Australia really associate you with. What was the desire to take on a role like that, which is still quite dark, but I guess comes from this very beloved book and this very complex, nuanced story about, cycles of trauma?
I've always been attracted to very like psychologically complex material. So often, while I'll still, as you said, it's still a very dark story. And it could have been easy to then pivot to something like really light after doing pretty dark material for a while. But I, th I think for me, it was obviously a very different kind of genre and story. But I, to answer your question, I desperately wanted to work back home. I wanted to work on Australian soil. I think I'd been away for 10 years. I was like, I want to reconnect. My dream had always been to come back to Australia and be working, but it just it wasn't as accessible, 5, 10 years ago. It's a lot more productive now in Australia, which is amazing. But I wanted to work back home. I had this deep connection with the way that the book talked about the environment of Australia, which was something I was really yearning for. The earth of it, the flowers, the connection to the environment felt very strong for me. But then also I thought when I read the book, I just saw it, and it was one of those experiences where I really connected with the character. I really connected with that story, and I just felt like I needed to be a part of it. It was so beautifully written and such a very unique take on such hard subject matter too. It was, while it's very traumatic and difficult, there was so much beauty still in it, which I thought was also very appealing to me. I think sometimes you see a lot of those dramatic stories and it's just like, oh my God, I'm gonna like feel horrible. But there was so much light in the way that Holly wrote the book, and then the way that Sarah Lambert, the screenwriter, then had adapted it. It was just something that I was like, I don't know, it just really connected with me, and it connected me in a cycle of my life too, where I was like, I want to be home. I want to reconnect with my environment. I want to reconnect with my accent. I want to feel a part of like the earth in a far more like in a more organic way. Or I could just, kept picturing like blundstones on like dusty earth and sunset skies dripping into fields, and it just felt very sensory to me, and I'm such a sensory person. I think that was really important to like find catharsis in this, and that's what it really was. So I was desperate to come back,
I
and that
love
was the
that.
vehicle.
You have just recently wrapped filming Apple Cider Vinegar, which is a new Netflix series, and it touches on the life story of Belle Gibson. You're not playing Belle, but it's a very fascinating and quite complicated story to sink your teeth into. What did you like about the script, firstly, and how they handled the subject matter, and why was it a character that you kind of wanted to take on?
Interestingly, I'd done then Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, and was thinking about pivoting then to trying to do a film or find a project back in the States so I could kind of keep that uh, you know, symbiotic relationship between the two countries kind of thing. But I read the scripts and obviously was familiar with the story. But when I read them, they were some of the best scripts I've read in recent years that I just couldn't say no. It was it's a very difficult story to tell, because essentially it is about the wellness industry and how it amplified influencer voices in the early days of Instagram, social media, and how that affected so many people with cancer and a huge audience that was so ready to take on any information that was completely, unvetted. So it was this very complex story, and especially complex story just about Belle herself, but then also but also cancer and the way it affects people, and then the way social media is used to manipulate people's experience or ideas of what to do. And it was done so well. Sam Strauss, the writer, just handled the material with such care, but also with such a gumption. It's not this story. It's I mean, objectively, that is like a very horrible story. Like it's very
Truly.
dark subject matter. But the way she's done it, is almost in the style of like I, Tonya. It feels very like punchy. It feels very gritty, and it feels no one is a victim in this. Everyone is like fueled with so much desire and force, and it's really exciting. It was just such a different way of seeing that story being portrayed that I was like, I really need to be a part of it, because it was just written so well and it's so great. And it's just, yeah, it's this really cool contradiction of like dark material, but with this like poppy Instagram filter all over the top of it. It's really fun. And it's also such an interesting time. I mean, it was, you probably experiencing it too, where it was, the rise of Instagram, the rise of the wellness warrior. There were so many women on Instagram that were, speaking about the benefits of juicing or living in, the sun-kissed like beaches of Byron Bay, and just toting this lifestyle that felt so covetable, but was not yet, part of like a monetized app. It wasn't hashtag ad. It wasn't this, we weren't savvy in the same way that we are now. And so it just, the influence it had was such a unique moment in time. Yeah.
That it's so true about those early days of Instagram, which we experienced, and how they had this kind of Wild West quality. And I think about like Elle, for example, ran a profile on Belle Gibson. And that's an era where like Elle editors are looking at Penguin and Apple and like, all of the places that appear to have given, and even Instagram itself, there's like something about social media that just feels like what people are saying on there is legitimate. It took us a while to realize anyone could just say anything at any time and it was totally unregulated. I think that it's still something that we're unpacking and making sense of in real time, is like how you regulate how people present themselves online. And then, I mean, with the character you're playing, from what I understand, is almost like an amalgamation of multiple victims, or is it actually based on a real person?
It is based on
Oh,
a
it's based
real
on that person.
person. This woman called Jess Ainscoe, but we've adjusted that character as well to reflect a little bit, to not be an amalgamation of sorts, but to heighten her quite a lot, because it sort of was someone that was going toe to toe with Belle Gibson in a certain way. It was completely unregulated. It was a Wild West is the perfect way to put it. It was just we were so porous. We were absorbing just all this new information so easily. And I think we still are, I think we've got better tools to deal with it. But I think most people, if you ask them if, the way that social media makes them feel is not great most of the time.
I think that's what's interesting about Belle Gibson, is like she's a very unsympathetic figure, so it's quite an easy scapegoat to, like, I don't know, hang all of lay the blame at her door, as opposed to thinking about the way that social media companies like showcase information to us, basically, and how everything is monetizable now and everyone is incentivized to create their own like cult of personality around themselves. And that's obviously going to lead to a very specific type of person going to drastic lengths to get attention. And it's easier to kind of make fun of Belle Gibson than it maybe is to say, should we have platforms like this?
Right. And she is an easy scapegoat, as you're saying, because she caused so much pain and harm and destruction. But I do think, it's interesting that what was my thought? It was that like people have now, you were once allowed to express yourself in the way that you felt aligned with who you were. And I remember this idea of this concept of like social media being a way to take ownership over your personality and take ownership of who you are, which I think is real to some extent. But once companies realize that that could be capitalized on, it's now feels like it's gone back to the fact that you are a commodity and not just not an autonomous person. So it's very fascinating, complex.
So interesting. I could talk to you about this forever.
I know. I was going to say,
like, we could be here all day, 4 hours.
We really could.
But thank you so much for coming on What the Elle. We appreciate having you, and we loved having your beautiful shoot in the issue and just everything about you. So fab. We adore you.
Thank you. It's been such a dream. I just loved talking to you as well. And that shoot was so fun. I was trying to get my agent. I was like, I want more of the photos, because I was like, there were so many great like looks that we had as well. And I was like, because it was such a great day. We shot so much. Oh,
we shot so much. It was our first shoot for the issue. So it was
that was the first one?
That was the first one. It was a moment in history, baby.
I'm so jazzed and excited though that Elle's back on shelf. It's the best.
Thank you, darling. It's great news. It's like, yeah, very exciting. Thank you again.
Thank you.
At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships.